Hello everyone, and welcome back to Autonomia, the show where we bring ideas from the libertarian left to everyday people, and foster conversation on what we believe in hopes of proving that we all have far more in common than we are trained to believe. My name is Hayward, and I am your host. As always, our intro and outro music come from a song called A Bigger Cage is Still a Prison by System Failure. If you'd like to look up this song, the band spells System, C-I-S-T-E-M, for political reasons.
There's nothing I want more than to sleep under the night sky, hear the animals as they go about their lives, feel the fire warm my body, feel the mud under my toes, but tonight this cell keeps me enclosed.
Hey everyone, I'm very happy and excited to announce that my friend Elci has given me permission to use samples of audio from his show where I have made appearances. I think that's really very exciting because it allows me to reference and direct people to examples of this sort of cross-partisan dialogue that I think is so important. So the first one that I have recorded is an example of me talking about the possibility of a second American Civil War, what that might look like, and most importantly, how to prevent it. You know, this sort of thinking is at the cornerstone of this entire project, and so to have the permission to be able to directly sample and reference those conversations is, I think, a really incredible opportunity to bring this project to another level and hopefully foster even more discussion. And I always try to give credit, of course, where that credit is due. If you listen to the first season of It Could Happen Here by Robert Evans, you'll probably recognize a lot of this content as being inspired and drawn directly from that multi-series podcast. And I wanted to try to bring those ideas and concepts to this audience that would otherwise never have explored them. And of course, I made sure to reference by name It Could Happen Here as a podcast that you really should listen to try to explore these concepts, because naturally a radio appearance, especially my second radio appearance ever, is going to be a time that is quite limited in how deeply we can go into topics, because a radio format, you have hard breaks, time segments, and Lee's been very understanding on quite a few occasions in allowing me to sort of bend the amount of time that's allowed. But when there is a hard break, it's a hard break. So I wanted to try to repackage a lot of those ideas and provide some of my own experiences as well, in order to discuss the possibilities of what might happen. And we also talked to a couple of people as well that called in. And many of these folks are people I still talk to this day. So I'm very happy to have had this opportunity. And so without further ado, I'm going to be playing my second appearance on the Lee Elci Show, as recorded on my computer as best as I could. I'm hoping to update my audio capturing capability to bring better quality in the future. But this is where we are now. If you'd like to find this directly, I will post a link to the full show on Lee Elci's SoundCloud. So without further ado, let's hear about it. Thank you.
All right, we're back. It's 8 minutes after the hour of 8 o'clock. So, a couple of weeks ago, I got a dog hair on my face somehow. A couple of weeks ago, we had Hayward Gatch into the studio, and it's just such a smart cat with a different perspective. And since then, well, even before that, he had become, what's the word I'm looking for up on the Facebook? Sort of not a muse, but
Irritant?
That's a good word, but in a good way. A good way. No, but you're a respectful irritant, and back and forth with some of the the folks who post up there, and I think it's great and very smart, articulate person who has joined us again one time in the past, and we talked about a couple of different things that time. But he had mentioned something about the Civil War, and I actually wrote a column about Civil War in for the day a couple of weeks ago, maybe a couple months ago now. But I wanted to get him in here to talk about that a little bit because I'm learning more stuff about him every single day, and he's telling me some stuff off the air which I won't share with you, but some stuff that's pretty amazing. So you've seen a lot of different things. You've been a lot of different places.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
And I guess with the violence, it seems like that this country is experiencing. Seems like there's an escalation of violence, and do you think that there's a time when we can see an actual full-fledged civil war?
So the first thing to mention is it doesn't necessarily happen like the way that it used to, where we fight Napoleonic style on a field and shoot at each other in giant lines and colorful uniforms. It's not how it's done anymore.
Right.
If you want to start with talking about that, I can bring up the most modern case study would be the Syrian Civil War. That can be traced to one town in Daraa. Some kids, like 4 or 5 kids, painted on the side of their school during the Arab Spring, "Your turn, doctor." Assad used to be an eye doctor before he was drafted as dictator. And that set off a series of events that created protests. Those protests were repressed. The repression bred more protests. Things got out of control, and what you ended up with was a multi-partisan conflict that eventually became a civil war because the government had to get involved. And as the government gets involved with their weaponry, the folks in Syria got involved with theirs. So it's a civil war in the sense that it's a war within a country's borders, but there are so many sides, and it gets so overwhelming and so confusing that it's not a civil war in the full-fledged sense of 2 fully armed military sides going at each other. But modern warfare has changed, as we all know, and there's no reason to not suspect that in America, a country, I don't know how many times the size of Syria, with a massively more diverse population, wouldn't have an equally complicated conflict if such a thing were to occur.
But people always will say, well, if it ever got to the point where the government was involved, well, that would be the end, because the government's weaponry in particular here in this country is far superior to anything that, even though that we have a gun behind every blade of grass, so to speak, that would be the game over. You're not going to be able to stand up against the military. But then that leads the question: would the military actually stand up against their own people here in this country?
So yeah, there are 2 points that are really critical to talk about when you pose a question like that, because that's often something we hear from liberal folks who are critical of the right to bear arms. They say there's no hope. My first response is tell that to the Mujahideen, tell that to the Viet Cong. Very, very minimally trained and minimally equipped people using the land, using equipment, using strategies. And the additional difficulty here is now in America, you'd be talking about troops fighting their own people.
Right.
There's a degree of strategy that can be used by a government by bringing folks from a different county, different state, so they don't have as much of a direct connection. But at the end of the day, that's really unlikely to be a unified front against the people. Even in Syria, where there are all sorts of very, very deep sectarian divisions, huge amounts of the military defected to the rebel side and joined the Free Syrian Army. So that's definitely something that would end up happening.
Interesting. You don't even think about that. You're right about that. So even if it were to spill out, you would actually have military folks who would defect. They would feel like I feel as though my brother feels. I'm gonna, and then they would. That could happen on a mass scale. Hayward Gatch is with us here in the studio. I'd love for you guys to call in. I know we've sort of conditioned everybody to call during the 9 o'clock hour, but if you want to call in 860-464-9490, 631-317-1949. Do you think we can get to that point? Do you think we're that far along in anger against each other that we could ever get to that point?
Well, I think that point that we were just talking about a few minutes ago would likely be several years off, and a lot of things would have to happen in a certain arrangement for that to happen. What I had intended on talking about today was potential triggers for that, but also how to prevent it, because I think that's just as important.
Before you get to your triggers, I want to ask you one other question, and then you can hammer away.
Mm-hmm.
Would you be more inclined to think that if a civil war were to break out, it would be one with a racial undertone or an economic undertone?
Well, so as I mentioned before with Syria, it was a constant deluge of different things that animated people for different reasons. I think in America, it would absolutely have racial elements to it, but also, we have the highest levels of wealth stratification we've ever had in this country. So it's
Right.
unrealistic to think in a country where a huge percentage of people are struggling to make ends meet that wouldn't be a factor.
Sure. Sure. The haves against the have-nots. All right. Talk to me about how to prevent it and
Well,
what would spark it.
Well, sure. So, what I'm hoping to do here is give a brief overview of possible contributions to a theoretical civil war, and more importantly, what we can do about it. And from there, hopefully, my ramblings will have left enough time for us to have a good and productive conversation. We're in a very bad way right now. Our nation has been very intensely divided for a very long time. Tempers have flared, extremism has been flourishing, prices go up, wages have stagnated or in some cases dropped, jobs have moved overseas, and people are going bankrupt or worse from medical bills. And to top it all off, states like ours are always trying to come up with new ways to tax just a few more dollars out of us and maintain some illusion of solvency, while us common folk scrimp and struggle outside of their gilded palaces. America is a massive nation with dozens of distinct and often adversarial cultures. It has literally been to war with itself, nearly leading to its permanent partition. Descendants of the losing side of that war still say the South will rise again. On several occasions, it has nearly again come to war. And in terms of history, any nation that goes more than a century without some type of massive civil upheaval is uncommon. According to the most recent Gallup poll, 70% of Americans disapprove of the job Congress is doing. I'll attach a link to the live tracker on the congressional approval so you can monitor it. In 2013, 600,000 bankruptcies were filed as a result of medical bills. America leads the world in medical bankruptcies, and it's not even close. 40% of Americans can't afford a $400 emergency, and that number jumps to 60% if it's a $1,000 emergency. What that translates to is a huge number of Americans that would be screwed if they lost a paycheck. That type of stress is not good for anyone, and I guarantee you there are people in your audience who know what it's like to not have the luxury of being sick. Rates of depression and associated mental illness are skyrocketing, unsurprisingly, and dependence on drugs to manage them legally and illegally is soaring. This is a brief list, and if you aren't already familiar with the expanse of these struggles, Rocky regularly cites the plight of the working class American on his show. While I've had the pleasure of meeting with him at a No Tolls rally in Norwich, I can only hope the feeling was mutual. But we discussed several critiques and we shared many things as far as criticisms of authority and living conditions that people currently have to be under. I did leave out that I am a fairly militant leftist because I have a feeling that would have shut down the conversation almost immediately. And as I had said to you in the comments more than a couple of times, I think it's far more important for us to speak about policies than labels because that gives us the opportunity to find common ground rather than be in an immediately adversarial position. I think that's very beneficial, especially given the subject we're talking about now. As of 2017, 22% of Americans supported their state seceding. 1/3 of Californians support secession. According to Glenn Beck on your radio station this past Saturday, folks are organizing to vote to secede from Colorado over gun control and other such grievances. On the vein of gun control, as another quick aside, gun confiscation is one potential flashpoint, and at least some of the Dems are finally being honest about wanting it. Unfortunately, it's become more about the fulfillment of an ideological aesthetic than actually saving lives. Around 3% of gun deaths are from rifles. Mass shootings are a smaller percentage of that percentage. And any amount is too much, don't get me wrong. We have a problem, but we need to deal with it. But plunging our nation into a bloodbath and simultaneously not addressing the underlying problems and causes is not a solution, in my opinion. Anyway, folks are angry for a lot of reasons, and they have been for a long time. They're balancing on the precipice of hopelessness and one last attempt at shaking things up for a chance at something better. It's no surprise that some folks talk about civil war with a degree of inevitability, The trouble is that some people in this country have been hoping and dreaming for such a thing for decades and trying to trigger it for just as long. Americans might want to be careful for what they wish for, and I'll expand on that in the comments of Lee's page rather than describe it here in the interest of time and focus. So there's a lot of tension and pain in this country, and it is in this context where Americans so desperately wanted to shake things up that the Trump campaign came in, and boy did he shake things up. Trump became popular with a great many people for a great many reasons. Some of those people were energized by his language. That, if we're being honest with ourselves, some of it did appeal to the far right. Whether by intention or not, it did happen. You can do your own research on that, on what they themselves say about Trump's rhetoric. But in my opinion, far more telling than anything else, he spoke to something with much broader appeal than at times racially charged and violent rhetoric. Rural America has been ignored for a very, very long time. Trump, with honesty or not, said, "I hear you," and that is very powerful. He rose to popularity for the same reason that Bernie had such a meteoric rise before the DNC machine completely sabotaged him at every opportunity. It's the same reason that Antifa, a once obscure subsect of the anarchist scene, became the explosively new viral trend in protest. Their militancy and their primary street formation, known as Black Bloc, with the it broke the overwhelming, soul-crushing monotony and hopelessness of a generation. And these gave an outlet for all the pent-up frustrations and failed movements of decades before that. These three populist movements gained steam because, as Michael Moore said while describing Trump specifically, he was the human Molotov cocktail they could throw into the system. These movements on the surface seem utterly incompatible, but none are a monolith. Groups of gun-owning anti-fascists organizing under the name John Brown Gun Club, yes, that John Brown, reached out to right-wing militias all over the country. With their shared interest in community defense and resistance to tyranny, they found common ground, and many of those right-wing militias were convinced to officially denounce bigots in their midst, and that's nothing to scoff at. Building off of this, it is my belief that we have a lot more in common than we are trained to believe. I wouldn't think it completely incorrect to say that I, a fairly militant leftist, and you, fair to say maybe a right-leaning independent,
Sure.
probably have a lot more in common with each other than either of us do with maybe Ned Lamont, for example. We don't have to agree on everything, but I have found that in my nearly decade of interviewing literally thousands of people in my travels around the world, that we are likely to have a lot of similar grievances, and more importantly, similar hopes and dreams. And to me, that is something we cannot ignore. We have become disturbingly partisan in past few decades, and part of that is because stoking the flames of division has become extremely profitable for the media. In the digital age, where algorithms determine the content we see and engage with, we become ever more insulated in our ideological echo chambers, and our links with people of other opinions fade away, creating further division. This is the type of division that makes a civil war seem not only possible, but to some inevitable or even necessary. We don't talk to each other. I heard this morning that Ned Lamont refuses to even come on. In 2016, 75% of Clinton voters and 50% of all voters haven't discussed politics with people outside of their party. Only 20% of voters have truly mixed social networks. That is not a good thing. And I am not saying that leaves room for genocidal ideologies such as the various strains of fascism, but unfortunately people, especially folks we like to call baby leftists, have a hard time discerning between folks casting a vote for a chance at a better life in the face of utter hopelessness and the very real and dangerous threat of fascism in this country. I don't think you're a fascist, Lee, and I certainly don't think you're a Nazi. And I feel the same way about your listenership. You've probably seen me harping on about Portland every time it comes up on your page, and well, there's something you might be interested to hear. An anti-fascist demonstrator went over to the other side. After a few minutes of some unbelievably vicious language, including "you deserved your rape," she began talking to people, and had a lot of really good conversation. Eventually, she asked if anyone wanted to have coffee, and she met with someone. And this person said she was very surprised that she didn't bring her anarchist buddies with her. What followed was a long and winding conversation that allowed them to find their shared humanity. It became apparent to this person that far from being evil, this person, who thanks to algorithms, only consumed far-right fringe media. So, if someone who was with some of the most extreme of the far right, and I can go into more detail on this work in the comments where time isn't a factor, can be reached and that conversation can happen, what are the rest of us doing? A civil war, and really any war, depends on dehumanization of the other side. It depends on people in your audience seeing me as a dangerously unhinged, basement dwelling, radical, Antifa welfare queen. And it depends on me seeing you and every one of your listeners as Nazis, or at the very least, in the words of Hillary Clinton, irredeemable deplorables. This dehumanization cannot continue if we wish to have a country. Do you know what helped kick off the Rwandan genocide, Lee?
No.
It was Hutu radio show hosts calling the Tutsis cockroaches, and that helped make ethnic cleansing seem like basic pest control. Variants of this happen in our media today, and I am very grateful that you have proven to be a fair and open-minded person, and you seem to have a much more measured hand in dialogue with folks outside of your ideological camp. I appreciate that, and I thought it was important to say. And don't get me wrong, there's a lot that's very, very wrong in this country, and a lot of people are suffering. And if I'm being honest, something like a revolution may end up being necessary in the long term. But you and your listenership aren't the people I want to be fighting. Like the soldiers of World War I who joined each other in no man's land to play soccer and shared photos of their loved ones, they had far more in common with each other than they did their leaders and the industrial tycoons making millions off of selling weapons to both sides. Do you know how that brief ceasefire started, Lee?
No.
German soldiers were singing Silent Night, originally a German song called Stille Nacht. Allied soldiers recognized the tune and sang back to them. That little shred of humanity put a temporary stop to the most brutal and utterly senseless war in history, and that should be a lesson to us all. A journalist who I have a great amount of respect for said something I really appreciated, which I will modify a bit for our use here. I'd rather stand side by side with my neighbors to challenge threats to our collective liberty than fight those same neighbors with bullets while the Clintons, Bushes, Obamas, Sacklers, and Jeff Bezos fly off to the Caribbean. It is my hope that at least locally this conversation, and if I'm lucky, those that follow, could be the start of our Stille Nacht.
I can't imagine anybody disagreeing with much of what you just said, Hayward. Very, very well done. Thank you very much for sharing that. We got a whole bunch of calls, and I don't want to cut anybody out, so I want to go right to them.
All right, let's do it.
Let's go to Frank. Frank, you're up, sir. Good morning.
Morning, Frank.
Good morning. Well, you said a lot there, but I wasn't sure if you was. I mean, for a minute there, I wasn't sure you were saying a civil war can happen or couldn't happen. But I got to be very aggressive here. I can tell you never served a day in the military. I can just tell by the way you talked. First of all, let me back this up a little bit. First of all, the way America is put together, a civil war is impossible. And if you let me go to the military first. First of all, you join the military, you train for. I don't know if you know this. That's why I think more people join the military. But this is the 2%. You train for foreign domestic. Matter of fact, when you swear your oath, it's foreign domestic. It's uprising of the people. If you really believe, especially special forces and Rangers, which I was part of, especially you train for that. If you really believe that I've started with people from down south that was racist, that we did not like each other, but when it came to battle and war, and we talked about uprising, it was together. If you really believe the military is going to sit back and see, that's what most people who talk about civil war in the United States want. They want to say, oh, the military wouldn't fight their own people. Believe me, they train for it every day. We talk about it every day. We have classes about it every day, especially the combat soldiers every day. Secondly, the way our country's built, the way we have things, even the poorest of the poor have something little to hang their hat on. Even the welfare people, even the Midwest people who there's towns with all on Social Security. When you have people like that, now if the whole country falls apart and people are starving, no one's going to fight by day and watch Dancing with the Stars by night. When you have a civil war, it's out there all the time. It's cold weather, hot weather. You need uniforms. You need, and matter of fact, we won World War II because of the way we fed our soldiers. We was more the healthiest soldiers. If you really believe that can happen, it just won't happen here. And another thing, most people, like I said, 2% of people join the military. Other people talk. They lie. They're overweight. They sit on their couch. Yes, they complain. They might pound on the ground. They might even say, "I'm getting weapons," but most people will not fight. Don't forget what happened in the West when those guys was arrested and they was gunned down. They tried to get an uprising. They tried uprisings in the past. FBI agents, they tried it. And when you say how Trump's talking to certain group of people, John F. Kennedy and Lyndon Johnson also talked to African Americans the same way when they didn't have a voice. I mean, there was no uprising there. You get somebody literal turn the head on. You're not going to have people out here with no electricity, no people going to be tearing down cell towers. We are too comfortable here. Even the poorest of the poor, which I came from. Okay, it's not going to happen. Even the poorest of the poor, I've been in Portland, Oregon. When I watch poor white people complain about things, but you know what? They still got their cell phones. They still got their welfare checks. They still got their Walmart jobs. Nobody's going to up now. Now you talking about a total collapse? Of course, if something total collapses and we have nothing, and no electricity, no cable, and no football, trust me, most men on football Sunday and baseball Tuesday and baseball Wednesday want to watch their baseball and want to watch their basketball. You know. Yes, we have a difference between Obama, George Bush, including Trump. We have just all of them, but we still have something to hang on. If you think that that's not planned, it's so planned.
All right, Frank. Let me let him comment because I got to get to another call before we run out of time.
So first of all, Frank, it's good to talk to you and good to hear from you. As far as saying things can't happen in this country, I think it would be
a total collapse. Yes.
Well, sure, it's too huge for a total collapse to end up happening. The folks in Syria enjoyed one of the most progressive countries in that whole region, and they had some of the highest standards of living. Yeah,
and it collapsed.
And it collapsed as a result of massive protests that were repressed in the same way repression has started off in this country.
Leader who was killing people, the leader, the United States wanted the leader. The United States was going to go in there and kill him. The leader was evil. He was killing people. Yeah,
absolutely.
If Obama or Trump starts lining people up and murder them, obviously that can happen over here. And plus, plus they have allies. No one is going to come here in America and support any side because of the power we have of the military. Even if the military is set to the side and let people fight in the street, the military would not allow another country to come here and get involved. So what are we going to do? And what would the winner look like? What if somebody walking on the street and say, "I don't want to have nothing to do with it. I don't want to fight, so I want to go to work"? What happens then? Do you shut their building down? What if Republicans and Democrats say, "I don't like him, but all I want to do is go to work and go and hug my children"? We have children that want to go to school, you talk very educated and you use very big words, but that does not mean you're right.
All right, Frank, thank you. Let me try squeeze one more. Mike, you're up.
Listen here, I have to agree with Frank.
What? That's the first time ever.
Oh, my.
Because Frank is obvious. Because he was a military guy. He's a veteran. I'm a veteran. Okay, some of my bestest buddies that I served with were named Bubba, Rocket J, and Floyd. All right? Rednecks. Deep, dark rednecks. But we were in the military together, and we served the United States in defense of the United States. Your caller, I have to agree with Frank, is very articulate and puts forth his point of view, but I want to know who his drug supplier is, because he is whack. Okay? It is never going to happen in the United States. Listen, we live in a country where we have fast food restaurants, all-you-can-eat buffets, and the millennials, their major concern is whether or not they can get Wi-Fi.
It's the same thing in Syria.
Nobody going to war against another American in the United States. Okay? Our diversity is what makes us strong. Okay? And since the Civil War, we have never risen to a point where it's brother against brother over an issue. What is the issue? Money? Okay? I was told a long time ago, if you want to make $10 an hour, get 2 $5 an hour jobs. And that's what America is based on. Your caller, that's why he can't say he's a left-leaning leftist, a radical leftist, because people will turn the channel and wait for you to start talking about relative things.
No, he already said that, Mike, to his credit.
He said, well, I have to admit it, but he didn't start off that way.
No,
I think he did.
2 minutes in.
Maybe I didn't hear him say it right away, but I heard him say it later on in his diatribe about he's leftist. Listen here, the Puerto Ricans are not going to fight the Irish. The Irish are not going to fight the Jewish. The Jewish are not going to fight the French. Okay? And he talks about Rwanda. Listen here, Rwanda and Africa and in the Middle East, Those are tribal nations. The United States was not a tribal nation, all right? They've been killing each other forever over there. That's why we're over here. Well, that's why we're the melting pot. That's why a Puerto Rican can marry an Irish girl. You know what I'm saying? That's why a Canadian can get rich in the United States, because it's all about the dollar bill. And as long as we support the American dollar, we're good to go. Okay? We have rivalries. Norwich hates New London. New London hates Salem. Salem hates Montville. But we take it out on our athletics field. We don't demonize each other to the point of where we want to destroy each other, except for abortion. And I'll hang up. You're having a good show.
All right, Mike, thanks a lot. And again, we'll try to squeeze in one more call. But I think in both those cases, they may have missed the overall point of what you were trying to say, which is, it's okay. I think you're right. Unless I missed it, I think your point was that, yes, war can be looked at a number of different ways. It doesn't have to be, like you said, lining up on a battlefield. It could be one small group against another small group, and I don't think that's impossible. I think that could definitely happen. Let me just grab one more, because we're going to run out of time. Yeah. Roger in Stonington. Roger, how are you?
Hey, how you doing, Lee?
Good. What's happening? You're on with Hayward Gatch.
Hey, Hayward, how you doing?
Oh, I'm all right. How about you?
Pretty good. Hey, I served in the military, too. I was
Cool.
Army
Thank you.
infantry. And shout out to the other two callers that have mentioned on this, but I listened to your entire podcast series, and I read the book, what was it, 1 Second After? If you go back and listen to your podcast and that book combined, you're going to see that there are a lot of little nuances to the possibility of a civil war in this country that some of these folks may not have taken into account. That, yeah, the military may or may not rise up against their own people, but in the presence of lack of medication, lack of electricity, lack of food, other factors, religious zealots coming into the mix, militant left, militant right, there's so many possibilities here that you really need to think of the bigger picture. I think in your podcast, you've done a great job of trying to get both sides to see we are really in this together. We really do have more in common than we'd like to think. And we really need to work this out before we get to that point.
Roger, thanks for your service, my friend. I got to run, though. I got to get one more final call. Rich, we got to do it in under 60 seconds.
Hey, Rich.
Okay. Real quick about Mike's comment. He said if you want to make $10 an hour, you get $5 an hour jobs.
Yeah.
How does that work if you can only work one job at a time? Still making $5 an hour.
Well,
but as far as American fighting American, what do you call Antifa?
Yeah,
you got these people already. They're already beating people up and fighting.
Right.
And it's just going to, in a matter of time, it's going to explode. All right, I'll let you go because you're pressed.
All right, thank you, Hayward. I appreciate it. Rich, thank you very much. Gordon, jeez, I'm all discombobulated. Hayward Gatch, thank you very much. Well thought out. I appreciate it. We'll do it again. All right, buddy. We got to take a break. Mike Finkelstein is waiting in the wings, and we're running late, so we'll do that in just a couple seconds. Stick around. We got a lot of questions for Mike. If you want to call in 860-464-9490, 631-317-1949. We'll be right back. Hang on.